Kevin had tried everything to get back on good terms with Debbie except that one thing. There was just no way in hell he'd say he was gay. If there was ever a less gay boy than Kevin, he hadn't met him. Sure, he'd joke around with his friends, call each other fags when they were working out and couldn't make that one last rep, or fumbled the ball, or didn't get that pretty girl's phone number, but that's different. That's just being guys. Sure, they showered together after wrestling practice, but that doesn't mean anything. Debbie had even tried to convince him that he'd chosen wrestling as his sport as an excuse to roll around on the floor with other boys. It had nothing to do with being violent or an actually useful skill to have in life. It was because he would wear a skin-tight little body Speedo and hug some other dude's sweaty body. And the louder Kevin denied it, the more obvious it was that it was true. But he tried everything else, even though she wasn't really his type anymore. What with the new blue hair and the weird clothes, she withheld loving from him, and after she'd sabotaged his reputation around school, it looked like no one else would ever want to touch him again. She was the only one who'd ever gone to third base with him, and he felt like if he could just salvage something with her, they'd get all hot and heavy again, and maybe she'd snap out of whatever phase she was in. She'd remember how much she liked his masculinity before it somehow became toxic. Then, when it looked like she was having her breakup talk with him in the playground of all places, she sat down in one of the swings and curled her fingers around the chains. Squeaking a little as she rocked herself back and forth, she told him that if he couldn't admit aloud that he was bi and stop lying to himself and to her, then they were through. And he decided to say to hell with it. What's the worst that can happen? Okay, he muttered. Okay, what? She asked, unsure if he was agreeing to break up. He swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. Okay, I'm bi. She sat up, a dozen emotions crossing her face at once, and Kevin was terrified. It felt as if he was playing Russian roulette and heard the hammer fall on a live round when he pulled the trigger, but it was taking its own sweet time blowing his head off. There was no turning back. And damnedest thing, she reached out and grabbed his belt buckle, pulling her to him, and her other hand seizing the lapel of his jacket to drag his lips down to hers. The fire of her kisses startled him, and the urgent savagery as she fumbled at the button of his jeans, but he overcame it quickly, and the squeak of the chains was fast and steady in the darkness. Her passion for him surprised everyone else in school the next day. She adored him and showed him off to everyone, her gay boyfriend that she couldn't keep her hands off of. They were blissfully in love. Except she kept wanting him to do girly things with her. Go shopping, hold her purse while she tried on shoes, smell the difference between glittery lip balms, look at buff guys in magazines and tell her which ones he liked, look at guys in the school yearbook and choose ones for a threesome. Sheesh, he thought. We just lost her virginity just now, and already she wants me to share her with another guy. It was obviously her fantasy and not at all what she claimed it was, her generously help him realize his hidden desires. No, it was definitely not her wanting it on his behalf. That killed it for him, the passion. Their trysts around school and the neighborhood, her pulling him into semi-private places to make urgent, desperate, dangerous love, stopped being magical for him. He couldn't shake the image of another guy standing behind her, pressed up against her. He imagined his own hands trying not to touch the trespasser, but unable to avoid it. What happened? She asked. What's wrong? I don't know, he whispered. I must be tired. Well, unbe tired. Her fierceness stung, and even if he could have at that point, he didn't want to. He wanted to be far away from her. All her friends knew the next day. Whatever sympathy she had wanted for not being able to please him, she was getting. But instead of it being poignant, so gloriously tragic, it was all his fault. She was the victim. He'd betrayed her by being gay. Later that day, there was a wrestling match against Balfour, the rival high school, and Kevin went up against Danny Moreno. They had seen each other at keg parties and around town. Danny was the one dressed up as a heartthrob scarecrow at the Pumpkin Festival, serving hot apple cider to giggling flocks of teenage girls. He was a lifeguard at the community pool, rocking an effortless six-pack. And now he was sizing Kevin up with piercing gray-green eyes, like that Afghan girl on Nat Geo, eyes that made Kevin stutter. And as if reading his mind, Danny smiled a contagious smile of dazzling white teeth. It got suddenly very warm in the gymnasium, and Kevin wanted to shut his eyes so tight he could teleport away. He could feel 1,000 pairs of eyes burning into him, and it made him feel naked in his lycra singlet, as if he'd publicly lost all his clothes in a nightmare. But he swallowed hard and went out onto the white circle on the orange gym floor, like a French baron to the guillotine. Professor Nightingale worked as a referee on some evenings and weekends, in his black slacks and black and white striped shirt, and maybe that's why a lot of Sunnyvale kids saw him as an authority figure. He was calling goals and strikes and fouls in just about every sport, so every kid recognized him around town and treated him with respect. He had high yellow skin and close-cropped, curly, salt and pepper hair, glasses, and that calm assurance of a no-nonsense black man, the kind that feared only God. People said he was from somewhere in the Bahamas and he'd come to the U.S. to go to medical school. After he graduated, he went back, but when he married a hot Hispanic nurse who vacationed on his island, they moved to Sunnyvale and started a family. Everybody thought of him as the dad from Boys in the Hood, that guy who seemed to know the other side of everything and could explain whatever was going on in such a way that you'd realize you'd been lied to all your life. Now he stood on the orange floor with a whistle between his pursed lips, and Kevin focused on him to avoid eye contact with Danny. Perhaps it was obvious to everyone else, the way Kevin looked everywhere except at his opponent, that he was uncomfortable, and that only made him more uncomfortable. And Danny's smile grew wider, whose teeth so bright Kevin could see them no matter where he looked. The gym was filled with the thunder of Kevin's heartbeat, and he couldn't hear whatever Professor Nightingale said. When it was finally time to square off against Danny, they circled one another with their heads low, arms swatting. For some reason, Kevin couldn't stop flashing on the images Debbie had tried to show him. Buff guys in magazines. Blonde tan dude with washboard abs, ginger model with freckles and cheekbones, tall, dark, and handsome with the angular jaw. Reflexively, Kevin squeezed his eyes shut, and Danny took his chance. Lunging forward and cupping one hand on the back of his neck, Danny put one knee inside Kevin's and tried to throw him. In a sudden rage against the shame in his head and his own carelessness, Kevin lashed out and lost his balance. The two went down in a heap, thrashing blindly for any hold they could find. By chance, Kevin grazed something he had not meant to touch, and his face flamed scarlet. He was suddenly terrified that his opponent would think he had done it on purpose, or worse, that everyone in the audience would think so. He mustered a deep, manly-sounding growl, more for himself than for anyone else to hear, and he heard a low chuckle that made his blood run cold. Danny knew what he was thinking and was laughing at him. That made Kevin furious, and he redoubled his effort, scrambling for a hold. They thumped their knees and shoulders on the hardwood as they rolled, sneakers squeaking, and their heads were filled with the smell of each other's sweat. The smell so strong they couldn't hear the roar of the people in the bleachers. As much as he tried not to think of it, Kevin was imagining actors in love scenes, trying not to get aroused, feeling the pressure of all the people in the room. The cameraman, the director, the key grip, whatever he did, and the actress in his arms. And the more he thought about it, the more scared he became that it might happen. And, surprise of all surprises, he felt his singlet grow tight. No, dear God, please, no! He struggled to hide it from the view of the audience, and in doing so, fell into the snare of Danny's legs. The strong legs of Danny Moreno, heartthrob scarecrow at the Pumpkin Festival, lifeguard at the community pool, pinned him like a vice. And squashed up against each other, there was no hiding it. Kevin shivered like a little bird in the grip of a snake, and he felt his opponent realize what had happened. There passed a long, tense moment where Kevin silently prayed. Don't react. Jesus, don't react. Don't start screaming fag and embarrass me in front of the entire world. That was the longest, most painful moment in his life, and when Danny started moving, flexing his lats like the spreading hood of a cobra, his shoulders extended, and Kevin realized that Danny was making himself bigger, taking up more space, not to pin him tighter, but to hide him from view. Then came Danny's whisper in a low chant. Dead puppies, dead puppies, dead puppies, dead puppies, and Kevin burst out laughing. The two of them collapsed in howls that made everyone else in the gym stare, dumbfounded. What the hell? Jeremy and the others asked. Professor Nightingale stood frozen over the two of them, his whistle forgotten between his pursed lips. A chorus of yells rose from the stands, disappointed parents wanting blood, and other students demanding a show. But the fight had melted out of the two of them, both overwhelmed by the absurdity of their situation. When Danny felt the coast was clear, he disentangled himself from Kevin, and they both got to their feet, wheezing out the last stragglers of their mirth. Kevin was smiling with blurry eyes, eternally grateful, and almost missed the amicable palm slap and fist bump from his opponent. They turned and went back to their teams, each of them clutching their aching sides, and Nightingale finally remembered himself, blowing his whistle in a brief toot. Later on, after Kevin's team had showered and criticized each other and the rest of the team had gone, Kevin sat alone in his blue and cream varsity jacket, with wet hair and a lost gaze. He almost didn't hear it, but approaching footsteps intruded, and Danny stuck his handsome face into the locker room. "Hey," he said, startling Kevin, who looked over his shoulder at him like a deer in the headlights. "We're, going for hamburgers." "Oh," Kevin said, his mouth suddenly dry. "We normally go for pizza." "That's probably why your team loses." "What?" "Kidding. Come on, we're going for burgers. I owe you one. You're the best player on my team." When they got to Rocket Man's, the retro-futuristic burger joint over on Dunbar, they were the only two in their booth. It seemed like whoever else Danny was planning to meet had stood them up. But that was fine. Kevin didn't want to meet a bunch of Balfour jocks and their girlfriends. "You ever been here before?" Danny asked. "No, I've been curious, but never been. I love the Jungle Burger. It's not what you'd think." "What would I think? A pineapple and some avocado on it or something?" "Yeah, I guess that's what I'd think. Just pineapples and avocados don't come from the jungle, so there's that. But bananas do." "It's a banana burger?" Kevin asked skeptically. "Fried bananas with curry and apricot chili sauce. So good." There was something about the way Danny said that last part, something so unmacho, yet so secure in himself, with the complete unself-consciousness of the Latin male. Kevin said, "Maybe they have pineapple in the jungle of whatever planet this is supposed to be." They looked around at the atom-punk decor. Kevin for the first time and Danny for the first time critically. There were a lot of murals with yellow and pink Saturns, improbable 1940s comic book spaceships, sexy Deja Thorises, and dashing Northwest Smiths, but it seemed like they were all somehow Russian. A strategically placed red star here, a hammer and sickle there, a Betty Page-style space concubine who was warm enough to be in copper breastplates and gossamer loincloth, but cold enough to need a tall fur Ushanka hat. It was the kind of science fiction there might have been if the Soviets had won the space race. Danny looked back at Kevin for a moment and then shrugged and said, "That burger's from the Dagobah system." Kevin looked at him in his wine red and gold varsity jacket, thinking how odd it was that he was sitting here with the enemy and liking him better than his own friends. There was no facade of toughness they had to feign, no, for lack of a better word, anti-intellectualism, or reluctance to sound smart. They both got jungle burgers, Kevin taking Danny's word for it, and those thick-cut fries that still had potato peel on one side and studded with little chunks of salt like diamonds. They made small talk for a while, questions punctuated by loud slurps of milkshake from thick red straws, until Danny asked the million-dollar question. "You got a girlfriend?" Kevin avoided it with a conspicuously large bite, desperately taken, that took forever to chew. Danny grinned with one side of his mouth and made an obnoxiously loud slurp with his straw. Looking out at the people at other tables, Kevin noticed kitschy curiosities on the walls like they have in Applebee's and Fridays. Those things rescued from some hoarder's basement to create nostalgia. But these were ray guns and retro-futuristic model planes, Art Deco robots, and spaceships spruced up like hot rod classic cars for alien teenage greaser punks. Bubbles flowed out from the floor to the ceiling in curved clear pilasters filled with colored light. No matter where Kevin looked, he felt those gray-green Afghan girl eyes boring into him until he couldn't avoid them any longer. He swallowed hard, took a slurp from his milkshake, and finally looked up. "It's okay," Danny said. "You can tell me." And the dam burst. Kevin spilled his guts about Debbie and all the pent-up things he couldn't tell Jeremy, Matt, Adam, and Chris. All the things he wouldn't have been able to tell a priest, he found he could confide in this kid who'd shown him a very unexpected kindness. He blabbered on for at least half an hour until the fries had gotten cold and starchy and the waitress had come over to be waved away 3 times. When Kevin's tirade had eventually ended, the silence reminded Danny of that time he'd gone to a casino with his parents. He had wandered around on the dark green and gold filigree carpeting, looking at people on bar stools hunched over blackjack hands or shouting at spinning roulette wheels until he came to the rows of one-armed bandits. All those lemons and cherries and flashing lights and the warped reflections of other machines and lights and the faux gold surfaces and the bleeps and whoops inviting him to feed them all his allowance money. Then he heard someone's miracle happen. An alarm sounded, a metal bell banging away at the top of a machine while lights flashed and quarters began to spill out of the wide mouth and into the woman's lap. She gaped at him in shock, watching them jingle over her legs and onto the carpet beneath her stool. It might have only taken a few seconds, but those seconds seemed like a lifetime. And when the last coin came banging out of the machine to fall with a silvery tink, she stared in baffled wonder. The silence that followed was heavy and lasted forever, the calm in the wake of a bomb blast. While Kevin was embarrassed, Danny found himself thinking the same thing he did in the casino. Jackpot. He almost didn't want the moment to end, but he knew if he didn't make his move, the opportunity would be lost forever. So now you worry she's right, you might be by? Kevin screwed up his face in misery. I don't know! The shadow of a doubt. Would you rather know for sure, for the peace of mind? How could I? You're good. What? I gotta hand it to you. You really had me going. What? This whole roller coaster of a story beating around the bush to finally get to the point. Come on, you had this all planned out from the beginning. Dude, what are you talking about? Kevin, Danny said with his dazzling smile. I'm gay. The booth fell out from underneath Kevin, and he felt the stomach-lurching weightlessness of being airborne. You're, he stammered. You're kidding. Danny shook his head. And you've been sweet-talking me this whole time, trying to get me to believe you aren't, so that I could give you the chance to find out whether you are, no strings attached, and I'd totally fallen for it. Kevin swallowed hard. You're serious? Danny swiveled in his seat, jeans squeaking on the red faux leather, and finally signaled the waitress for the check. Let's get out of here, he said. They walked silently down Dunbar to the lamppost and stayed just outside the ring of light for a very long time. And now Kevin stood frozen, staring at those gray-green Afghan girl eyes in front of the blood-stained handball court.